Good evening and welcome. My name is Tracy Johnson. I'm the Dean in the Division of Life Sciences here at UCLA. Before we start, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded, so both the chat and the Q&A functions have been disabled. So we thank everyone who submitted your questions in advance. So I started my new role as Dean last September, and I've been honored to lead this division and to really build on a foundation of excellence that was initiated by my predecessor, Dean Victoria Sork. I've been a faculty member here at UCLA since about 2013. I'm a professor in the Department of Molecular, Cell, and Developmental Biology, and my research is focused on understanding really the basic mechanisms of gene regulation, how genes get turned on and turned off at the right place and at the right time. But during my tenure as dean, I really look forward to being able to highlight some of the really incredible research and wonderful accomplishments of the faculty, students, researchers in all of the departments within life sciences. So today, I would like to welcome you to our inaugural event in our new lecture series hosted by the division, Let's Talk Science. And this evening's talks are going to be on the topic of sleep, the brain and human health from adolescents to adults. So this lecture series really is intended to showcase UCLA's research expertise on today's most urgent challenges, from diseases and treatments to mental health to the environment and the role that science plays in society. Today's topic is focused on the significance of sleep on brain development and health, and we're going to hear from some real experts in the field. So at UCLA, we study the entire spectrum of sleep, from the molecular level of genes that get turned on and off, some of the kind of things I'm interested in particular, and to hormones and the psychology that's involved in sleep and mental health. So today's event on sleep is an example of the range of topics that this event series is going to explore, from the micro to the physiology to function. And our hope is that this evening's event, as will be the case in future events, is not only enlightening for you, but also sparks conversation and action, and yes, can even change lives. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the three faculty who you will be hearing from this evening. I'm really pleased to start by introducing you to the Chancellor of UCLA, Chancellor Gene Block. So as the Chief Executive Officer, he oversees the university's three-part mission of education, research, and service. Chancellor Block has defined academic excellence, civic engagement, diversity, and financial security as top priorities for his administration. He's a champion of public universities, and his dedication to access and affordability have enhanced UCLA's position as a national leader in enrolling undergraduates who may be Pell Grant recipients, come from underrepresented populations, and many who may be the first in their families to go to college. Under Chancellor Block's leadership, UCLA has been named the #1 public university in the United States and has grown its profile internationally, and it receives more than $1 billion annually in research contracts and grants. In one of the largest capital campaigns ever undertaken by a public university, UCLA surpassed its $4.2 billion centennial fundraising goal more than a year ago, ahead of schedule, raising $5.4 billion total. An expert in neuroscience, Chancellor Block's current research focuses on the effects of aging in the nervous system and how it impacts biological timing in mammals, including humans. He holds faculty appointments in psychiatry and biobehavioral science in the David Geffen School of Medicine here at UCLA, and in integrative biology and physiology in the College of Letters and Sciences. Chancellor Block earned his master's and Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Oregon. Please join me now in giving a warm welcome to Chancellor Gene Block.
Thank you, Dean Johnson, and good evening, everyone. And it's great to be with you, albeit via Zoom. So there are very few individuals who over their lifespan escape from sleep issues. And certainly there's some adolescents and young people who experience only occasional bouts of sleeplessness. But most individuals, as they age, quality sleep becomes more and more difficult to achieve. So first, sort of truth in advertising, I'm not a sleep researcher or a sleep physician. My expertise is in a field called circadian biology, which is the understanding of how an organism's internal timing system regulates on a daily basis nearly all physiological processes, from the molecular cycling that goes on in your heart to daily cycling of hormones to the timing and regulation of sleep. And over the past several years, my interest has really focused on the impact of aging on this circadian system. So the relationship between the circadian timing system and sleep centers is complex. But we do know that dysregulation of the circadian system by travel across time zones, rotating shift work, or excessive light exposure at night, which is becoming an increasing problem, can have a pronounced effect on sleep. We also know that aging weakens the signals from the internal timing system, and this appears to have a negative impact on the quality of sleep and the overall sense of well-being. In the very short time that I have to speak, let me give you a brief sketch of the circadian timing system and how this system's characteristics can impact the quality of your sleep and alertness, even under normal conditions when you're not performing shift work or traveling across time zones, just living every day in our environment. So if I can have the first slide, please. The near 20, thank you. The near 24-hour cycles of behavior and physiology that humans and many other organisms exhibit are referred to as circadian rhythms, from the Latin circa diem, about a day in length. Your biological clock actually has a period a little longer than 24 hours, but the daily light cycle sets your internal clock to exactly 24 hours and synchronizes it to the local time zone. However, if you're placed in a room without time signals, such as continuous dim light, your sleep cycle actually slowly drifts out of phase and drifts out of synchrony with the day outside your room. You actually drift a little bit, about a half an hour each day. So you have this internal clock that is not exactly 24 hours, it's circadian, about 24 hours, but it's made to be exactly 24 hours by exposure to the light schedule. So if I can have the next slide, please. In humans, if one measures multiple physiological and behavioral variables, these variables show a strong circadian rhythm, whether this is a circadian rhythm in body temperature, sleep, reasoning speed, or a rhythm in the levels of melatonin. These rhythms are endogenous. As I mentioned, they persist even if the human experiences continuous dim light or darkness. In the experiments whose data is summarized and shown on this slide, 10 subjects were kept awake in constant, unchanging conditions. Yet the subjects' physiology and behavior exhibit circadian periodicities. And that's important to remember. Even though the light-dark cycle synchronizes all of your internal rhythms, the internal rhythms are just that, they're endogenous internal rhythms. So next slide, please. The central biological clock, controlling the various rhythms shown in the last figure, is located in the brain, actually at the base of the hypothalamus, and in a group of neurons that are referred to as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, long words, but SCN for short, SCN. And that is really a central clock. The SCN receives direct retinal input from the eyes, which allows the SCN to remain synchronized to, in our case, Pacific Standard Time. So it's through this pathway from the retina to the SCN that the SCN's periodicity is synchronized to exactly 24 hours and set importantly to our time, our time zone. If I can have the next slide, please. Although this is a longer story than I currently have time for, like most things in biology, the story is more complicated than a single biological clock in the SCN. When I was a young investigator, I thought this was going to be a simple story in mammals, and we had a singular clock located in the hypothalamus. It's so much more complex than that. It turns out that most organs, tissues, and cells in humans have the capacity and do generate circadian rhythms in the synthesis of proteins and other physiological functions. So the circadian rhythms are spread throughout the body, actually. This complex system is synchronized primarily by the SCN, which serves as a central clock, much like the motherboard timers would synchronize peripheral processors in a computer. You know, it's easy. You can think about the circadian rhythms of the many tissues in the body as clock pendulums swinging back and forth, oscillators that were all connected with rubber bands, with the SCN pendulum being the heaviest pendulum, and it synchronizes the rhythms of these many other pendulums. With jet lag, these many pendulums come out of synchrony with one another, and that's when the traveler experiences malaise. In aging, it appears that the rubber bands between the various pendulums become weaker, and it takes longer for an elderly person to recover from rotating shift work or jet lag, or generally just achieve adequate sleep. The age-related weakening of internal coordination may explain why elderly adults require more temporal structure. It suggests, I might add, why grandma and grandpa may need more temporally predictable life than their grandchildren. Many of us remember grandparents or parents who demanded to eat exactly at the same time each evening. The regularity in time meals and sleep may help the internal timing system remain better coordinated. Literally, the system loosens as you age, and it becomes harder for your body's internal clocks, as it were, to remain synchronized. If I can have the next slide, please. Let me talk now a little bit about circadian rhythms and sleep quality under normal environmental conditions. It turns out that humans not only vary in the amount of sleep they require, but perhaps more importantly, they also vary in the time at which they prefer to go to sleep. That is, not only is the duration of sleep variable, but also the time at which they prefer to go to sleep is variable. And as you know, some of us are larks and wake up early. That's me, go to sleep early and wake up early. And these folks are often referred to as early chronotypes. They're the larks among us. Then there are the owls, and they go to sleep late or very late. They're the late chronotypes. The owls actually have a problem because they live in a world where everyone wants to begin or usually has to begin work early in the morning. And this often leads in owls to short sleep durations and a condition known as social jet lag. So if I can have the next slide, please. Let's look at some data that was collected by Till Roenberg, a well-known German chronobiologist. Dr. Roenberg has done these fantastic questionnaires, computer-based questionnaires, where literally hundreds of thousands of people have responded and about their sleep cycles. And he asked people to determine their natural sleep cycle on weekends and so-called free days when they didn't have to wake up with an alarm clock, when they could go to sleep when they wanted and wake up when they wanted, when they did not have to follow a work schedule. They kept track of this data and they submitted it to Dr. Roenberg, who's analyzed a very large amount of data to determine each person's chronotype, that is, their preferred time of going to sleep. What he found is represented in the figure that you see. The yellow, green, and light blue bars represent the most frequently observed bedtimes. So these are the bedtimes that most people would experience on a weekend, from going to sleep at around 10 p.m. in the evening to some people going to sleep as late as 1:30. But the vast majority of humans, when they have free time, their range of bedtime is about 10 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. However, there are extreme larks who go to sleep very early, the red and orange bars, and there's people who go to sleep very late, the dark blue and purple bars, the true deep owls. It's these people who are represented by the dark blue and purple bars, the owls, who really suffer from social jet lag. This is because they're forced to wake up early in the morning when they should really be sleeping, which often leads to insufficient total sleep, and light exposure in the morning at an inappropriate time of their circadian cycle. It actually has a disruptive effect. In some individuals, these unnatural awakenings lead to increasing fatigue as the work week wears on. So they get increasingly fatigued. They're never sleeping well during the work week because they're simply being forced to go to work at a time when they really need to be sleeping. So if I can have the next slide. Unfortunately, social jet lag has consequences, and data that's been acquired on depression, smoking, alcohol, and caffeine use shows very clearly that the later your chronotype, that is, the more of an owl you are, as indicated in this case by the dark blue and purple bars indicating these very late preferred bedtimes, the more likely you'll struggle with mood disorders and substance dependence. One observation that becomes clear from these data is that if employers could match work cycles to chronotypes, they would have happier and more productive employees and probably working more safely. So there really is an argument to figure out a creative way to allow people to work more along their chronotypes rather than forcing all of them to get up early in the morning and work during what society considers to be a normal work cycle. So there's so much more I'd like to talk about, but I have to leave it here. Simply making the point that the circadian system controls the timing of sleep and wakefulness, and that relationship can have significant impact on sleep, even without crossing time zones or performing shift work. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Chancellor Block. That was fascinating. As many of us have experienced during the pandemic, the effects of changing those clocks can really impact work. But it may be an opportunity to also, maybe an interesting opportunity also to adjust our clocks. Um, so thank you for that presentation. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Gina Poe. Dr. Poe is a neuroscientist who specializes in the study of sleep and its effect on memory and learning. She's conducted sleep research for more than 30 years. It's hard to believe, certainly looking at her. Her lab investigates the mechanisms underlying the role of REM sleep in memory consolidation. And in particular, her lab studies how sleep serves to give us insights into difficult problems, process traumatic memories, and actually clean our temporary memory storage places to allow new memories to form and consolidate. She earned her PhD actually at UCLA, pursued postdoctoral work at the University of Arizona, was an assistant professor at Washington State University and the University of Michigan. And we were fortunate to be able to recruit Dr. Poe back to UCLA as a full professor in the Department of Integrative Biology and Physiology in 2016. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Poe.
Thank you so much, Dean Johnson. I really appreciate that beautiful introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Chancellor Block is the head of a university that has a great history for sleep research, sleep and circadian research. I'm going to share with you a picture I have from before I started graduate school, even at UCLA. And that was in a program led by Michael Chase, who is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry here at UCLA. And he started the very first national multi-site training program for basic sleep research. And what he did is he had a summer sleep workshop that was at the UCLA Conference Center at Lake Arrowhead, California. And this was the very first one in 1988. You can see me as a 21-year-old, I think, about 21, 22 years old at the time. And you can see this picture really encapsulates almost everyone who was doing basic sleep research at that time in the entire world. There were a few people in France in addition to the ones you see here, but pretty much this was it. So I was really lucky as a post-bac researcher to be in a sleep-related lab here at Barry Sturman's lab, who also had an appointment at UCLA, and right next to Jerry Siegel, who's also in the Department of Psychiatry here at UCLA, and get to know all of these people. This man right here, Ron Harper, became my PhD thesis advisor. And this man became my first husband. So you can see it was a pretty great community. And it's still like a family. It's still warm and thriving community to this day, largely in thanks to the great efforts of Michael Chase to light a fire under the basic problems of why we sleep and what it's all for and how it happens way back when. So does every animal sleep? Well, yes. Here's a jellyfish that was most recently found to sleep. Jellyfish don't even have a brain, but they have neurons. And here is a sleeping jellyfish that was just awakened by a jet of water. You can see it pulses quite a lot more often when it's awake than when it's asleep, but it likes to go back to sleep. If it's at nighttime, it's got a nice circadian clock that says, hey, it's nighttime, I should be sleeping. And so he's going to go right back to sleep here as opposed to this waking jellyfish. You can see they just pulse much more often than a sleeping jellyfish. So here's where the jellyfish is and sort of the phylogeny of animals. And here are we in mammals. It used to be thought that the sleep function for mammals might be different than that of jellyfish and other animals, because we knew that we had at least two states of sleep, and that was a deep slow wave sleep state of sleep and rapid eye movement state of sleep. But in fact, now that we look into it carefully, we can see that every animal studied also seems to have two states of sleep, even REM sleep. So here's the jellyfish again, and how often it pulses during the daytime. At night, it's pulsing less often, but there are also times when it's not pulsing at all. These are times of, you can call it atonia, when the jellyfish isn't pulsing at all. And that's akin to the atonia, which means not movement, not moving, of us during rapid eye movement sleep, which is the state when we're dreaming. Now, who knows if jellyfish dream? This great study was done by our neighbors over at Caltech, by David Prober's lab just a few years ago. It's really great to be in Southern California in general. So yes, every animal sleeps, and every animal that's been looked at closely, lizards and Drosophila, I mean, these are actually called dragons, and Drosophila all seem to have these two states of sleep. So even giraffes, we sleep in these two states, even when it's really dangerous. A giraffe, when it goes into REM sleep, has to lay that long neck down because it also can't keep up that muscle tone to keep upright. And of course, that's an extremely dangerous time. Now, here's a motorist so sleepy, he had to pull over to the side of the road, thankfully, and just take a nap here. And then in Japan, which is the most sleep-deprived nation in our modern world, you can see that people go to sleep everywhere, whether it's safe or not. It's just an imperative. So what happens during sleep? What we've learned since those early days is that sleep is, I'm covering my camera. There we go. That's better. Sleep is a time when we really can clean up our brain after what you can consider to be, during waking, an entire big party. Every time we're awake, even if we're just watching TV and reading, our brain is rearranging itself. It's using a lot of information. Every thought requires taking down of information out of our memory banks and putting it away again. And the putting it away again and cleaning up after this big party of sleep happens, of waking, happens during sleep and only during sleep. So here is a recently discovered glymphatic system. It's like a lymph system in our brain, which helps us pump the garbage out of our brain. And that happens during that deep state of slow wave sleep, when our brain is just pulsing with activity and inactivity time after time. This state of slow wave sleep gets smaller, and slow waves get smaller as we get older, unfortunately, perhaps leaving us more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease, because we can't pump out that trash as effectively when we're older, if our slow waves are not as large. And another thing that happens during sleep pretty selectively is proteins are synthesized. This is how much protein is incorporated, amino acid is incorporated into our brain when we're awake. This is a rat brain here during REM sleep. So there's some, but during slow wave sleep, that deep slow wave state, you can see proteins are synthesized en masse. It really, really happens. So this is a time for repair, not only for our brains, but for our entire bodies. So it's really, really important. You can imagine if it's important for all of these things during development, when learning is going on and our brains are having to make new formations and clear away things that are not relevant during development. So here's an example of a baby girl taking her very first steps, as you can see from the look on the father's face. It takes a lot of brain reformation to be able to learn to walk. We're not born learning to walk, but we're born with the raw material to be able to do that. And that process of learning requires a lot of establishing new synapses and pruning away of other synapses between neurons in the brain. And so my lab studies what happens in the brain that might underlie problems that we encounter when good sleep is gone. And you can imagine there's a lot of reasons why good sleep might be gone. Trauma might be one of the reasons. Depression is characterized by disturbed sleep. And of course, circadian rhythm disorders like Dr. Block was telling us about. Okay, so this is our non-linear here across weeks, months, and years of life, amount of different states of sleep. I talked about that rapid eye movement state, and here's non-REM sleep where that deep slow wave sleep state is also. And when we're first born, about 50% of our sleep is taken by that rapid eye movement sleep. Also, what's not even included in this old chart from 1969 is a state of transition between non-REM sleep and REM sleep that I'll talk a little bit about today. And that state of transition really shows us that, well, first of all, it's really a powerful time in our synapses. And so I'll just show you briefly what happens during that state. Okay. So in that state of transition, which is called N2 sleep in humans, there's something called sleep spindles. Sleep spindles are these short 1 second long bursts of activity in our cortex, electrical activity in our cortex, that seems to now be important, we are finding out, to incorporate new information into our sort of our existing circle of knowledge. So when we learn something new, like where new food is in relation to an old environment, like we teach our rats, we use our sleep spindles to erase old connections that are no longer relevant and incorporate that new information. And if we don't have good REM sleep and the non-REM sleep and the transition between the two, you can get mixed up as to which, what is new and what is old and what you should do in a new situation. So here's that baby who just took her first steps, and these are the various stages of sleep that she and adults go through. First, when we first enter sleep, we go into that N2 stage, and then that deep slow wave sleep stage, and then this rapid eye movement sleep stage. And you can see there are different electrophysiological characteristics that you can measure with cup electrodes. There's also an area in our brain called the locus coeruleus that turns off just prior to every one of these things, which I circled here. That's our sleep spindles. And so if you record from this locus coeruleus, which is deep in our brain, on either side in our brain stems, you can see that the locus coeruleus is off prior to every one of those sleep spindles, if you're recording at the same time. And that silence of the locus coeruleus is really important. And that's what we're studying today in my lab, which is funded by the National Institute of Mental Health and by UCLA. And I have wonderful graduate students and undergraduate students. Thankfully, just so glad to be here at UCLA, where you can find such fantastic people working on these really important projects. So what we found very briefly, and I'll just give you 2 slides, is that if you disrupt that locus coeruleus activity and you keep it active during the time when it should be silent, which is during REM sleep and that transition to REM sleep when you get sleep spindles, you get animals that can no longer learn where new food is in an old maze. When we take away where food used to be and put it in new places, they can't incorporate that new information and they get confused. If you do it pharmacologically or through stimulation of that locus coeruleus, you get that same effect related to the number of sleep spindles that you have during the night. So just one last thing, which I'll show you, which is an example of a reason why this really is important, to incorporating new information into old. Say, for example, you're in the theater of war and the sight and sound and approach of a helicopter might be associated quite quickly in your brain with danger, firing bullets or dropping bombs. And so what you should do in that situation is duck and run, get out of the way, right? But when you come to the theater of home, which hopefully is a safe theater for you, you have to reassociate that sight and sound and approach of a helicopter with something a little safer, like a news helicopter. And if you aren't able to distinguish between the two contexts, the context of home and the context of war, you're going to be confused. And silence of these tiny area in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus, which means blue spot, is really important to reshape the network and incorporate that new information with the old. And if you don't have the silences, you can get post-traumatic stress disorder. It's associated with other schizophrenia and other mental health disorders. So I won't take up any more time. I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for being here and for listening with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Poe. That was fascinating. Now we all have a even stronger sense of just how important the rested brain is. And it feels as though it's as important to have good sleep as it is to have good food for our bodies to function. So thank you for that. And now for our final speaker, I'm really excited to introduce to you Dr. And Dean Adriana Galván. She's a professor of psychology, and her expertise is in adolescent brain development. So in addition to that, Dean Galván was appointed UCLA's Dean of Undergraduate Education just this last summer. Her research examines how changes in brain maturation relate to adolescent behavior and decision-making, and the role it plays in risk-taking behaviors such as substance abuse. A primary goal of Dr. Galván's lab is to understand adolescent behavior by using neuroimaging methods to study the changing adolescent brain, including how stress, sleep, puberty, social relationships, etc., affect adolescent choices. Dean Galván earned her BA from Barnard College at Columbia and PhD in neuroscience from Cornell. She spent 2 years at UCLA as a postdoctoral fellow before joining our faculty in 2008. It is my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Galván to tell us about her work.
Great. Thank you, Dean Johnson. I will share my slides. Let's see. Okay. I'm honored to be here and to follow Chancellor Block and Professor Poe in talking about the science of sleep. And I will be focusing on the neuroscience of adolescent sleep. Just a second. Oh, looks like I was at the end. Apologies for that. Okay. So I will start by defining what I mean by adolescence. As Professor Dean Johnson mentioned, my research examines adolescent behavior broadly defined and all the factors that contribute to that behavior. Adolescence spans the ages of roughly 10 to 25. So when puberty strikes is really the beginning of adolescence, and through the mid-20s is when we can agree that the brain continues to mature and to change. And during this time, there are various stages of adolescence, ranging from early adolescence to late adolescence. And throughout this time, there are significant changes in sleep. In part, these changes are influenced by the social and the biological factors that contribute to sleep. According to the National Sleep Foundation, adolescents do not get enough sleep. And for anyone who is listening in on this webinar today, you will know, if you have adolescents at home, that their sleep declines pretty dramatically when they hit puberty. This graph is showing that newborns roughly average around 14 to 17 hours of sleep, although it doesn't feel that way when you're a new parent. But by the time people are adolescents or teenagers, they're getting about 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and that's the optimal amount of time for them to be sleeping. But we know that many factors contribute to less sleep than the recommended amount of 8 to 10 hours. This graph is showing us that in 6th grade, what you're looking at here are typical school day averages of sleep among bedtime and start time and wake time, between 6th grade on the left and 12th grade on the right. What you'll notice is that bedtime starts to get later and later as people progress through middle school and high school. And that differs, and it is in contrast to bedtime gets later and later, but wake time is roughly the same in order for kids to get to school on time. And so what that means is that there is less time asleep between the 6th grade and the 12th graders. And there are various reasons why this happens. Some are social in nature and some are biological in nature. The social reasons are ones that we know from firsthand experience. These include the increase in social media use as people progress through high school, family sleep patterns contribute, and also school demands. But that doesn't explain all of the reasons that adolescents start to go to bed later and later as they become high schoolers. There are also biological reasons. One of them is puberty. One of them is a sleep phase delay that I'll explain in a second. And the other is the very nature of transitioning from childhood to adolescence, and that is the changes in brain development. There are a surge of hormones that instigate dramatic physical changes that lead to sexual maturation. And the reason this is relevant for sleep is that a lot of these pubertal changes and changes in hormone release occur in the hypothalamus, which Chancellor Block alluded to earlier. And these changes in hormone release actually lead to changes in how our bodies respond to light. You may recall that he mentioned the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. And the SCN changes in its response to light and dark cycles as people become adolescents. This change leads to what's called a sleep phase delay. And roughly speaking, this means that as adolescents transition into puberty, their circadian rhythm shifts about 2 hours towards a night owl preference. So even younger kids who were the larks that Chancellor Block mentioned and have a preference for being awake and active earlier in the day or in the morning time of the day, as people become adolescents, they shift towards a night owl preference. And in part, this is because how the SCN responds to light shifts because there are changes in melatonin release, which I'll get to in a little bit. This graph illustrates this, this shift. So what you're looking at here is data representing that as kids become more pubertally mature, that is, they release more pubertal hormones, they have physical changes, they begin to sleep less and less. And all of this coincides with the significant and very normative changes that occur in the brain through the mid-20s. Some of these changes include greater connections or establishment of connections among brain regions, greater activation of certain regions. And these are all very adaptive in that they represent and help support the increases in exploratory behavior and socio-emotional learning, in bonding, and that happens in adolescence. But what that means is that the brain shifts also in ways in which it responds to light. So one thing that happens is that blue light that comes from our phones or our iPads or other devices tricks our brain into thinking that it isn't time to sleep. So when we're looking at our phones late night, and I know we all do this, not just adolescents, the brain starts to dampen the amount of melatonin that is released. And melatonin is the hormone that kind of induces sleepiness. And this is extra enhanced in adolescents who have a particular relationship with melatonin. Earlier, I mentioned that adolescents have a delayed sleep delay. And what that means is that they release melatonin later in the night. But if they are looking at their phones late at night when they're in bed, and many of them report doing so, then their brain is more likely to dampen that melatonin release. So why is sleep important for brain development? As Dean Johnson mentioned, I study adolescent brain development as related to motivation and learning and decision-making. And a few years ago, I realized that sleep contributes to all of these processes. And it's important to keep in mind how that may impact the decision-making that is observed during adolescence. Learning systems depend on sleep to retain information. Professor Poe showed the video of a new baby learning to walk. And these are the very same learning systems that help adolescents explore the world, become versed in more sophisticated cognitive processes, and all of this depends on sleep. Socio-emotional systems, or the systems that help us relate to others, to bond with others, to form relationships, respond differently following sleep deprivation. Research from adult research and also our own work in adolescent research shows that the socio-emotional systems are amplified following sleep deprivation. So if adolescents are not getting the sleep they need, they're more emotionally reactive. Poor sleep also disrupts maturing connections between brain regions. A few slides ago, I showed that one important part of brain development is the establishment of these connections, and they rely on good sleep or high quality sleep for this to happen. And so poor sleep really delays that process. And finally, we learn from our lab that adolescents are more impacted by sleep loss than adults. We all probably don't get the sleep that we need, but this is more impactful for adolescents. And I'll end by showing just a little bit of data from our lab in which we did a study where we went out into the community all over Los Angeles and collected information about the sleep environment. So we collected data on the noise level that adolescents were experiencing when they were sleeping, the temperature, the light, the sleeping surfaces, technology, across socioeconomic environments. And what we found is that none of these were significant in terms of impacting the sleep that the adolescents were receiving, in turn, their brain development. I should say that we did this survey of the sleep environment and then also invited participants to get a picture of their brain so we could look at their brain development. And the one thing we found, and the one thing I want you to take away from this talk, if nothing else, is that the most predictive factor that contributed to their sleep quality and subsequently their brain development was their pillow comfort. And so what we found is that the quality of the sleep was dependent on how comfortable the adolescents were rating their pillow. And I was really excited about these findings because it suggests that there's a relatively simple intervention that we can use to improve adolescent sleep, knowing that adolescents are not getting the enough sleep that the National Sleep Foundation recommends. So with that, I will stop and I look forward to the discussion with my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galván. It is really fascinating to learn about the adolescent brain and adolescent brain development, and getting some tips on how we can improve young people's healthy habits and behaviors. So I also want to thank our entire panel for a really illuminating set of presentations. And now we're going to continue the conversation with Chancellor Block, Dr. Poe, and Dean Galván, and address some of the questions that we received. And we're going to address as many as possible in the next 12 to 15 minutes or so. And so I'm going to start with a question that whomever wants to take this one. And I think maybe we can start with Chancellor Block. What sets an individual's clock? It seems like different people have different clocks. So can a lark become an owl? Can an owl become a lark?
So very important question. And it's apparently there's a very strong genetic component to setting your phase of your sleep, the timing in which you go to sleep. I'm less certain about the duration of sleep, but certainly the timing of sleep. And there are certain genes, clock genes that actually can, that regulate this timing. And mutations in these genes can cause problems. So there's families that were originally families studied in Utah. The whole family went to sleep extremely early in the evening, and they had a mutation in a gene. So it was a genetic component. It was called early phase sleep syndrome. And the whole family would go to sleep very early. So there's a big genetic component to setting the timing of sleep. Looking at this from a population point of view, it's probably important for any species to have a wide variety of potential sleep times, because your predators keep changing. And sometimes the mouse wants to come out early in the evening, and sometimes the mouse wants to come out a little later in the evening, depending on predators and environmental conditions. So I think some of this is pretty basic to developing patterns of variability, genetic variability, that are protective for the species, I imagine.
Really.
I'm sorry, Dean Johnson. As far as training yourself, it is very difficult to change either your timing, your preferred timing of sleep, or, for example, try to train yourself to unusual non-24-hour cycles, like trying to. Some students believe maybe they could go to a cycle where they could stay up for 24 hours and then sleep for 12 hours and stay up for 24 hours, and it's highly disruptive and very difficult. And it's a problem that submariners have had. It was submarine schedules often in the Navy with unusual work sleep schedules.
Mhm.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I think that leads into a related question. Is there an optimal amount of sleep? And is that number and our understanding of that changing? So, for example, we've talked about adolescents, and many of us work with college age students who might want to stay up till 2 and 3 in the morning in order to, start their start their classes later. But is there an optimal number of hours of sleep?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I get this question a lot. And the National Sleep Foundation says about 8 to 10 hours. That's kind of ingrained in our brain, right? We need 8 hours of sleep. But the truth is, there are really a lot of individual differences, and that changes certainly across development. What we found is that the quality of sleep is actually maybe, dare I say, more important than the number of hours. Knowing that one person may really need 7 hours to get a good quality sleep and others may need 9 or 10 means that maximizing the quality of sleep is really important. Similar to that is the consistency of sleep. So, not really varying in what time you go to bed is equally important. So it's not like you're going to bed at 9 p.m. one night and then 2 a.m. the next. That's highly disruptive and kind of leads to this social jet lag that Chancellor Block mentioned in his remarks.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that a little bit also, both what you said. I'd like to liken sleep and the cycles of sleep as to like the cycles of a washing machine. You kind of need things to proceed in an orderly fashion and one thing to happen after another in order for your clothes to come out clean at the end of the night. And so if you interrupt that washing machine cycle by lots of arousals and awakenings, you can end up in the morning with, soggy wet, cycle of which in the brain would be just a non-refreshing sleep. And where the sleep is not doing what it's supposed to do. So to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, Dean Galván, it's not so much the total quantity as the quality and the consistency in terms of the uninterrupted quality. Now, it's not okay to wake up once or twice, that's fine. But frequent arousals, like what you get when you have obstructive sleep apnea, people with obstructive sleep apnea, you can't even get the diagnosis unless you wake up at least 5 times an hour. And that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's already a lot.
Yeah, we did a study where we gave participants actigraphs, like Fitbits basically to monitor their sleep. And we found that some adolescents woke up as many as 20, micro awakenings per night. They didn't realize that they were awake, but that really disrupts the sleep in the way you're describing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's fascinating.
I'll add a little historical context. It's very interesting that in the Middle Ages, when there wasn't so much when artificial lighting wasn't available, on winter days and very long nights in the winter, people would actually have 2 sleep bouts.
That's right. Yeah.
Period. And this middle awakening that used to, apparently people claim that was the most productive time. They'd wake up for a few hours in the middle of the night. They could do their best writing.
Yeah.
And then go back to sleep. So I think this idea of a consolidated, 8 solid hours of sleep may be due in partly to our modern lifestyle rather than our natural sleep cycle.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. And now every time I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm going to have images of washing machines in my head.
Which part of the cycle was my brain in?
I know, exactly. And actually that comes to another question. Is it possible that, Dr. Poe, you brought up this really interesting set of studies of the relationship between sleep and dementia and Alzheimer's in the aging brain. Is there any data that there is such thing as sleep therapy? In other words, is it possible that some of the kind of disease states can be reversed by adjusting sleep habits?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I know there are a lot of people that are working on that right now. One of the things one could do to make sleep more efficient, like Dean Galván was saying, is perhaps giving types of stimuli to the brain during sleep to try and emphasize those things that occur, like I talked about sleep spindles. It turns out the density of sleep spindles per hour is correlated with really important things like IQ, or the ability to consolidate memories across sleep. So there are some researchers, at least a dozen researchers in the world right now, trying to boost the number of sleep spindles. But it really is that timing is everything. So it's not just the length of sleep, but the quality of sleep. And there are really interesting specific things that have to happen, like those sleep spindles have to be nestled within these big slow waves in the transition to REM sleep state. The hippocampus has to be in a particular state where it's reactivating memories in order to send them to the prefrontal cortex to consolidate those memories in the right way. So it's not just willy-nilly that you could do anything to just try and improve sleep. We don't know yet what we can do, but we're working on it. As soon as we find out more about what's happening, in the brain while we sleep, we can figure out ways to maximize it.
Yeah. Wonderful. I want to ask a question that I'm always curious about. One of the most fascinating phenomena related to sleep, in my opinion, is dreaming. So what's the current state of understanding of the role of dreaming in brain health?
You love this, Gina.
I love this question.
You love the dreaming, so go ahead, Gina.
All right, well, I don't want to hog the floor, so anyone else, please jump in. So dreams are really difficult to study from an animal perspective because, we can't ask them. They don't tell you their dreams. However, we do know that activity in the brain during REM sleep, which is the state when you wake up someone out of REM sleep, they will tell you they were dreaming vividly. And the activity in the brain of other animals is the same. And one of the things you can see is their memories are reactivated during this state in a kind of real-time mode. It used to be thought that maybe when we dream in fast forward motion because you could dream about a whole year and in a few minutes, but it's more like a movie in that it clips out all the, irrelevant stuff. And so, a movie can have a whole year go by in 5 minutes as well, right? So things seem to be reactivated in real time in the dream state of sleep. And this is a really uniquely plastic time when that blue spot I told you about, that locus coeruleus, is off. So what can uniquely happen during that dream state of sleep is you can strengthen things that need to be strengthened and you can weaken things that need to be weakened, which is extremely important because our brains, when we're born with overconnected brains, and learning involves pruning away things that aren't, as well as strengthening things that are, like when we learn who our mother is, it could be our features of our mother, could be anything. So we learn who she isn't as well as who she is when we learn who our mother is. And so so there's some theories that I think are really cool right now. It used to be thought that, well, I won't even go through all the crazy things that people used to think dreams were for. But now I like this idea of it's a time when we can explore possibilities. So in our narrative of our dream, for example, just the night before last, I dreamed that I was invited to a university to talk about a collaboration with the laboratory, and they were giving me a tour of the university, and the last stop was an auditorium, and it was packed with people. And I was trying to find my seat. I didn't know why the person had brought me there. And then I saw my name up on the, so I was supposed to give a talk. And so, so I was going through these scenarios in my dream. What do I do? Do I run back to the hotel and get my talk from my computer? Or do I just kind of ad lib without any slides? And so I think I like the idea that dreams are a time when, free of any consequences, you can explore lots of different opportunities. And so when you are awake and you're finding yourself in a similar, situation, you'll know what to do.
Yeah, I've heard also that dreams help you practice, right? Like if you're dreaming that you're being chased by a lion, your emotional and arousal system is practicing your reaction, because as humans, we don't often find ourselves in that kind of threatening situation.
Thankfully,
yes. That's right. We find other things threatening, right? Like social evaluation or things like that.
Birds practice their songs in their sleep.
Isn't that so cool?
Yeah, when they're learning singing.
That's really fascinating. During the pandemic, the times that we're in now, so much of our sleep is kind of disrupted or modified. And, I have kind of two questions that we'll sort of end with. The first is, do we have a sense of, or is anybody studying what the effect of the pandemic is having on sleep and, as a consequence, brain function? And then I'll end with a question about what we can all do to get a better night's sleep. So I'll put both of those out there in our last few minutes.
I don't know. It's interesting. I was thinking about that whole issue recently. Is I don't know if there's data out there yet, but the possibility of getting great data is everywhere. In between Fitbits and iWatches and everything, data is being collected right now. So somebody, you just recommended a great study. Somebody should
exactly. Someone's dissertation.
Yeah,
I think you're right. It's probably had impact on people.
Yeah. There's been a bit of data from developmental literature, and because adolescents, all students are obviously doing remote learning, there's some data to suggest that they're actually getting better sleep because they're not rushing out the door in the morning. They're not, waking up at 6 in the morning to get to the school bus or whatever. And so that is actually a very interesting idea that if left to their own timing, adolescents are not, having that compressed sleep that based on that figure it was showing, that they still go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, but go to bed later because now they may have more time.
So letting them be owls, but then modifying their schedule, sort of like what Chancellor Block suggested.
Yeah.
So actually using, it may be a time when people are actually taking advantage of the fact they can control their work cycle a little better to match their chronotype.
That's right. Exactly. Coming back to the chronotype, that we cannot control that, right? That really is kind of a lifelong pattern of behavior.
Yeah, so there's some data that if you start school a little bit later every day, teenagers are less anxious and do better, grades are better.
Yes. And actually, the Geffen School at UCLA does a really good job of having the later start time based on the sleep data. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to have a shout out to our Geffen Academy colleagues who
that's right.
thoughtful about the research to support the mental and physical health of students. Okay, in our last minute suggestions on sleep hygiene, what are some tips for healthy sleep habits that you can recommend?
One is a consistent bedtime, I think is one.
If you go to the National Sleep Foundation, they have a bunch of tips, and I think that they're all really good tips. And I think that what Dean Galván just said about a consistent bedtime is extremely important. There's a new study, it's still being run, but the preliminary results are really promising that older people do much, much better with this consistent bedtime that Chancellor Block was talking about. And that the more variable your sleep time, onset time from night to night, the worse your dementia scores. So,
interesting.
Yeah, the regularity gets really important as you get older, and I think it's self-medication in an interesting form where you really feel much better if you regularize your life.
Yeah. Another thing I would say just quickly is don't stress. If you have insomnia and you can't sleep, what the National Sleep Foundation and the Sleep Research Society and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine all suggest you do is get out of bed and do something else for a while. Because again, it's not the total length of sleep, but the quality of sleep when you get it that is important. And if you stress about not being able to sleep, you're not going to be able to sleep.
It makes it worse.
Yeah.
The other thing is the light, right? I mean, I think really a dark space, really back to the basics, the same thing you do for your newborn. You get them in a dark space, you have some white noise in the background, all of that, regulate the temperature, all of that applies to people of all ages.
Yeah.
Oh,
and get a good pillow. Remember what I said, get a really
pillow.
Good pillow. Many of us do not pay attention to that because we just, use the same thing that we've had and pay attention to that.
Yeah,
I think our audience is probably Googling Amazon buying pillows right now. Dr. Poe, I hope I didn't cut you off. You mentioned
something. I was just going to say, a warm bath or shower also has been shown to increase the quality of sleep for some reason.
Well, there you go. Well, I have to say, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I can already feel like my life and my sleep is going to change for the better. So thank you all for your insights and for your scholarship, and also just for being such fabulous colleagues. I feel lucky every day to get to work with you all.
Oh,
And
well,
I'd
thank
like,
you for bringing us together.
Yes,
yeah,
thank you for bringing
Thank
us
you.
together.
and there will be more. This was our first event, but we will continue to have Let's Talk Science events into the future. New topics to be uh, um, to be announced. And so I want to thank the audience for joining us in this conversation on sleep, the brain, human health, from adolescents to adults. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you take something from today's discussion that will help you in your sleep and in your waking time. This webinar has been recorded. We will send a post-event email with a link to the recording. So please feel free to share it with others. And also stay tuned because we'd love to have you join us for our next event. So thank you all and have a lovely rest of the evening.
Good night. Sweet
night.
dreams, everyone.
Thank
Sweet
you.
dreams.
Good night.